All right, welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn with myself, Terry Bean, and Francesca Amante. We are excited to talk to you about behavioral elements and all of the different aspects. And this month, we are going to focus in on the air element. I will let one of you two start us off, maybe Terry, since I think his is exceptionally higher. I'm pretty high, but Terry takes the cake here. So Terry, why don't you tell us, at least give a little bit of a primer here for the air element. What are we dealing with?
So I love the frame of innovative, curiosity, and creative. I think that those three things are so bang on, that curiosity piece especially. My wife makes fun of me all the time because we'll be in the middle of a conversation with other people and I'll just disappear. Right? Because I saw something and I need to go see what it is. Not when the conversation's done, but right flipping now. And she's like, that's kind of rude. And I'm like, well, it was kind of rude that they were boring me to tears too, but you didn't hear me complain. I didn't say anything. I was nice about it. I came back. And so it is. It's the best double-edged sword there ever is, right? There's no real linear process or thought process. I can work on 27 things all at the same kind of timeline. But good Lord, don't ask me to finish anything because that's like where work begins. I'm the best starter, best opener you've ever met, but the closing and the finishing is always like a pat on the back moment, right? Like I completed it. I'm excited. So
So,
that's how I like to think of the good, bad, and the significantly less attractive of being an air type.
okay. And I'm gonna get to something that you said because I think that's really important. It sounds to me like the journey is as important as the destination for an air. Is that something that maybe would land for you, Terry?
100%, right? And because I want to soak up the moments, right,
Mhm.
along the way. I'll stop. But smelling the roses, I don't miss the opportunity, especially if those roses are lilacs. Like I'll literally pull the car over and stick my face in a lilac bush because I like the scent of it. And maybe I'm weird. Well, did I say maybe? How cute.
All right, so let me ask this question to Francesca. Francesca, you're a fire and water is your primary and secondary. I'm a fire and an air. And I'm curious, is there points of frustration sometimes when maybe a Terry and I decide to go, ooh, squirrel, and we start looking out the window and running around and not really kind of focusing or doing our own thing and just kind of like, huh, yeah, and whatever that is. What's the frustration come from that, and how does that look for you?
Thank you, Jay. It's a great question. It's funny, it's not a frustration for me because even though I am dominant fire and I do have that secondary of water, I may have to retake the assessment. I'm curious where my air sits, but my air is my third, and you're correct in that. I don't get triggered by that because I'm equally just as squirrely, if that makes sense. If anyone has ever heard me tell a story, I will be sharing something, and all of a sudden they're like, and we're on a loophole, and here we go. So I think also too, and my coaches, I have three different coaches, whether it's personal or inner child work or professional, that I work with, and they will say, one of my I'm not a big alcohol drinker. So where I think most people would like enjoy getting to, buy a case of beer on the weekend, my any of my resources that I can budget out goes to my development and my learning. And I want to understand why I am the way I am. How can I evolve? How can I grow? That's where all of that goes to. And so I think there's an aspect for me where when you guys are in your element of, sharing and learning, it just inspires me. It doesn't trigger me. I feel very seen.
That's amazing.
I
So,
feel like Francesca's air is fundamentally higher than ours. I think about the innovation, the creativity, the curiosity, the learning that she continually dives into. And I'm like, she might have air as her third, but it is definitely a primary driver as well. Although, is your air higher than your earth, Francesca? Are they similar? How does that show up?
Earth is significantly lower than all of them.
So
Yeah.
we all have that in common. Well, and it's interesting, right? This does lend that sort of credence to the concept of just because we're low in something doesn't mean we're bad at it. Just because we're high in something doesn't mean that we're good at it. It just really helps us to establish what are the patterns of behaviors. So, even with somebody like Francesca, where air is third, it may be one of those things where Francesca wants to get results. She wants to make sure everybody's okay, but she also does love that innovation side or love that because honestly, her earth is low, but she's can be very structured, organized, significantly more than myself. I want to take to the chat here because we're going to talk real quick about the diametrical opposition of earth and air. And I just want to say, Julie, I see you in there. Man, oh man, high earth and fire. So when we think about, the behavioral elements wheel, and you've got your earth in that top corner, which is unstructured and collaborative. You have earth, which is on the bottom, which is structured and more of the individualistic side, get the job done by myself, not necessarily have to brainstorm or anything else. We can see a lot of tension. So, given the three of us don't have particularly high earth, but I think that we've all explored what happens when air and earth end up colliding. It can be a bit of a tornado. So let's have some conversation. What are some of the maybe gaps that air brings to the table? Some things that if I'm an air element, what do I need to be mindful of? What are the things that are going to definitely cause frustration with some of the earth elements that are out there? And we see you, we know how valuable you are, and we know how important it is to have that structure. It's we're not trying. It just happens.
My wife is a high water, but I think she lied on the assessment. I think she's highest earth. Right. And so the biggest gap between us, and I alluded to it earlier, is that linear processing, right? She and I can have a conversation where I'm on my phone or she's on her phone. If I'm on my phone and we're chatting, I will continue the conversation and keep being in my phone. If she's on her phone and we're chatting, I just stop talking and she doesn't even notice, right? Because she's on the phone doing her phone stuff. And so the ability to, we can't truly multitask, but come close to parallel processing only exists in one of us, right? So getting to the point, staying on task, getting something done is very, very important to her. None of those things even register in my world, but learning to adjust and adapt, because peace is important, is definitely something that comes immediately to mind.
Okay. Francesca, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, in terms of if we're still relating air to earth, I feel like, earth wants order, process, predictability. Us a little bit more with the air. We want exploration, novelty. We want to ask questions. We're curious about everything, right? So I feel like Earth's, and I mean, Julie's in the chat. I love Julie. She's so talented and exceptional at what she does. And I think that what I love about her is she's got that fluidity to go with someone who has high fire and air. Earths have the ability to adapt. It's just, Earths can be rigid. So I think that when airs come in the mix, it can be frustrating just because Earth wants to stick to the plan. They want to have sustainability and make sure those tasks get done. And of course, with us as heirs, we're just like, oh my gosh, and we're going to go to China tomorrow and to Brazil tomorrow. We're so excited for what's new and what's next. So I think that's the wonderful gift that we get to have is having a diverse team and making sure that we have a little bit of everything to keep us on task. And like Jay said, just because we're low in something doesn't mean we're bad at it. I think that some of those people on our team help us bring out those different elements in us, even if we may be primary or more dominant in air.
Yeah. So my air is my second preference, and it is higher than many people's primary. So it's sitting at about a 5.5, 5.7 or something like that, which makes my fire exceptionally high at like seven something. So this is how it's always kind of shown up for me is the air element for me was I innovate things in order to win. And I think where my air ends up clashing with maybe an earth or even a water is I'll have an idea, and it's one of those things where you've probably seen a conversation where it's like, hey, maybe you ought to think about that before you start that. We should put a plan together. Be like, yeah, that's a great idea. The problem is I've already started it, and I'm about 6 yards down the field at this point in time. So planning, let's plan for the end of this because there was no plan to get it started. It was just get it started. And I think that that has created some challenges. I would say that's created some challenges in my professional life, but it's also created challenge even with personal relationships at different points in times because I didn't wait for everybody to kind of weigh in. It was just hit the ground running and go. And don't worry. So I'm banned in the company from using my favorite catchphrase, we will figure it out. And in fact, one of my business partners who banned me from making that catchphrase bought me this really amazing knife when I was going into the survival stuff and everything else like that. And it actually has runes carved into it that says, we'll figure it out. He's like, I figured that might help you as you're going into the woods that you're going in without a plan. So that can create a lot of tension, I think, especially when, you know, uh, air, certainty doesn't really matter. It's part of the journey or it's part of the experience. Failure doesn't really matter. If we fail, we'll find a different way to do it or we'll figure it out. I didn't fail to create the light bulb 10,000 times. I learned 10,000 ways not to do it. And that's one of the things that I want to chat into here. How strong, because air it is, it can be innovative, it can be explorative, it can be creative, but it's really focused on that drive to learn. Our ancient ancestral brain that was like, hey, I better figure some stuff out here if I'm going to survive in all these conditions. How strong is the learning pull for you guys? I'm very curious on that. Is that the kind of primary way that your air shows up, or is it something else? Is it more the creativity? Is it more of the exploration? I'm really curious.
Francesca, you want to take that?
Harry, feel free to go ahead. I'm happy
All
to
right.
follow.
So learning to me is super important, right? Because that's where growth lives. When I joined Facebook, literally the day it opened up to gray hairs and no hairs when you didn't need a college ID anymore, it asked for a quotation. And the quotation I wrote then that still sits there says, I've never learned anything new with my mouth open.
Hmm.
Right. And so I like to consume as much information and knowledge. And I'm not necessarily like a tinker in the shop to go figure out mechanics. I'm not mechanically inclined, but mental models, thought processes, human behavior, how we show up, relationships, communication stuff, all of that fascinates me. So I tend to dive into that. And I wonder if it's because of the water being as high as it is. My water's about where your air is, Jay. Um, like learning without sharing and giving other people that insight, that opportunity to grow. It like if it was just me in a vacuum, I'd be curious as to how I would show up and learn on a regular basis. So they're super tied to me or tied together to me, right? I want to learn so I can educate, right? So I can inform.
Makes sense. Francesca, what about you?
Absolutely. I would say even though my air is my third drive, I would say it shows up pretty powerfully for me in everyday life. Personally, I'm constantly reading, listening to podcasts, or studying new frameworks. that just help me better understand people and my own behavior. Professionally, I really thrive in teaching or facilitating. For me, learning isn't just about taking in the information, it's definitely about how I can translate it in a way that others can understand, and that really fuels me up. But I would definitely say from an outside perspective, and I was reflecting on this earlier today before our call, I think from anyone on the outside looking in, I've always thought, oh, anyone that doesn't know me would assume I'm a water. But lately I've been reflecting on that. And I think that probably from the outside looking in, they would assume I'm a high air. Growing up, I played piano and like flute and learned how to play guitar. Maybe would translate to being a high air. So, yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Jay. Is it, like you always say, just because we're low and it doesn't mean that it's on our strong suit. So,
Yeah, for me, when I start thinking about the learning aspect, it really does for me. And again, with this being a fire as my primary, I learn things so that way I can win or solve things or fix a problem or get a result. And a lot of times, because I do love helping people, I love helping organizations. Often my research is, my original is research is me search. But in reality, a lot of what I'm trying to learn is so I can figure out new ways to help other people either shift their behaviors or help an organization overcome a challenge that they haven't, that they don't have experience in. So for me, I love, 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 love learning about neuroscience, learning about psychology, learning about organizational development. But my learning, yeah, I read a ton. Yes, I listen to podcasts. Yes, I listen to audiobooks, but my learning really comes from application. Like I have to do something with the learning. I either need to teach it, I either need to implement it or anything else for it really to be cemented for me. So I can listen to a concept that's going to spark my curiosity. And then I'm going to go, ooh, what if I tried this? What if this worked? How would this go? But I immediately, and I think this was my frustration with like learning environments in higher education, was I felt like that was a lot of learning for learning's sake or a lot of philosophical learning. For me, learning is application, and it's not necessarily about the journey for me. It is about the what is the end result of what I just learned, and how am I going to use this or apply it? So don't get me wrong, I get curious and watch like YouTube videos on air traffic controlling, and I know that that's never going to do anything for me. I have that curiosity about me, like, how does this work? But for me, real learning is just a means to the application of it. And it could be the application in my life, but it could also be the application in an organization or in a coaching program or something of that nature. I think that's where maybe my nuance is just a little bit different.
No, and that makes sense, right? And it's really interesting because I don't feel like we spend enough time talking about how each element supports each other element and how we can use, a combination of elements to compensate for where we're low, right? And how that interplay I think is so important. But I love the fact that you're like, yeah, dude, I learn because I want to win more, right? I dive into the curiosity because I want the result of that knowledge. I don't, the knowledge itself is fine, but it's if it doesn't help me do this, I might not dive into it as much. And I think that's kind of similar across the board.
I want to take a moment and take a look at the chat, and I'll come. Go ahead, Francesca, before I do that. Okay, so I did want to see a note in the chat. Heinz, thank you for that. I love those catchphrases. What would it take from an innovation standpoint? And then also, don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. So I like those. I think Heinz is pretty high on the air element too. Very creative individual, also a leadership coach, communications coach, does a lot of really great work in helping people solve problems and think through things. So kudos to you, Heinz. I do love those phrases. Let's talk about that innovation thing. When we think about innovation, every organization says, "Oh, I want innovation. I want innovation." But one of the big challenges that I have seen in an organization is the block to that of, but here's the system or here's the process, and we've always done it this way. And, we can't do that because of this, or we can't change that because of X, Y, and Z. So I want to ask the real heir in this, Terry, you know, what happens when you meet resistance, or how does an heir handle resistance when it's like, okay, we can't just go exploring every, rabbit hole. We can't just look at this, that, and the other thing. Um, what does that resistance look like for you, Terry?
I had a good friend of mine who was starting a business, and the business sold twice, so they did exceedingly well for themselves. And his father-in-law at the time owned a large automotive supplier company. And when he was starting the business, the father-in-law gave him a piece of advice. He said, "Your business absolutely needs a board of directors. That board of directors needs to be an odd number of people. That number of three is too high." And there's something very refreshing about the idea that your board of directors should be one and it should be you. And you should take advice and counsel from that person most of all. And so I say all that and share that story because I don't live in a world where I can get resistance. I resist the resistance by being out on my own because I'm not trying to, like, there's a lot of people that want to tell you what you can and can't do, but those limitations aren't yours. Those limitations are theirs. And so I tend to avoid a lot of it in the scenarios where people have told me that. One of two things happen. I don't necessarily argue. I ask questions, right? I lean into that curiosity and try and understand where they're coming from, why they see it as a limitation or as a bad idea. And then maybe I use some of my non-existent debate skills and point out that we can pull it off. Um, or I walk off and do it anyway, right? Those are the two big things that end up in my.
Okay. Francesca, your thoughts? And I know you had something before too.
Yeah, it was actually just something that Terry and you had said that sparked a thought in terms of how our air relates to all of that. And I just wanted to add on to what Terry had said prior. And Terry, you just inspired a thought for me, and you're so right. I think because my fire drive wants to win, achieve, perform at a high level, my air drive supports that by making sure I'm always prepared with new knowledge or insight. Because for all of us, we all tie, I think a lot of us tie success to intellectual credibility. And then I was also thinking about my water drive, which Terry, I think you'd relate to this because you're pretty high water as well. We're seeking connection and harmony. So our air kind of softens that fire aspect by allowing us to pause to reflect and kind of give some more understanding to people's perspectives and kind of gives us the language to support others emotionally, not just intellectually. So I think sometimes we can get kind of sidetracked with what's the knowledge here, but when that connection piece comes in, our air really does allow us to reflect and go, what is Bob or Sue thinking? How can I relate to them? And not just from a textbook, but really from heart to heart. But anyways, when you said that earlier, Terry and Jay, it sparked that thought for me. And I thought maybe someone in the audience could relate to that.
I love that. And, the reality is as a competitive and trained debater and a very, very high, one of the things that I had to learn to do was actually listen and be more open because a lot of times, and I think that this is partially because of my scientist brain, is I'm often listening for what's wrong being said. I don't know if that was trained into me from the debate side, looking at it like that, or if it's okay, let's hypo test that. Let's create a hypothesis. Does this work? Does this pan out here? And I like learning that way. I like learning by disproving. This is why, when you talk about like good science, it's put a hypothesis out there and be okay if that hypothesis is wrong. I'm very okay with that. And I'm often looking for where is the gap? What is wrong with this? Where can we make this perfect and, publish something of that nature? But yeah, I think the water probably really helps for you to have that more collaborative air element show up rather than a competitive air element show up. which is probably a lot nicer, I would say, for, team dynamics, relationship dynamics. So let me ask this question. If you're to think about, say, curiosity. Now, one of the things that all three of us coach is approach situations with curiosity, approach conversations with curiosity. It keeps us out of conflict zones. It keeps us out of making rash decisions and things like that much more effectively. How do you remind yourself to do that? And I know with a high air element or that sort of like focus on it, you want to learn anyways, but we're all human. We all have all four elements. So if I'm an air element or not an air element, how do I tap into that aspect of curiosity, especially in conversations?
I'm a fan of the mantra, leave people better than you found them. In an effort to do that, we actually have to pay attention to other people and put their needs, I don't know about ahead of our own necessarily, but certainly on par with our own. So in that moment, I often engage in two behaviors, listening as well as I possibly can, and it's strategic partner asking really good, insightful questions. And I haven't figured out in 30 years of thinking about it whether it's more important to ask good questions or actually listen to the answers. So we could debate that later on. I'm fascinated by that discussion. But that's it, right? It's the idea of I shrink my ego to the point where it's like, I'm not here for me, I'm here for you. And if I take that approach and that mindset, I'm here for you, the rest of it just flows naturally.
Mhm.
Okay. Francesca?
Yeah, really well said, Terry. And I think for me, and I think all of us can relate to this. I think 90% of the time we do our best to approach a curiosity, not make assumptions. But us as human beings, I think that naturally um, there's an effort to balance that every day. I think we're constantly working to evolve in that area. I know for myself, I think probably it's my fire that gets in the way sometimes where I'm like, but all the facts line up to this, and here's the conclusion. So I really have to take that step back and say, well, and approach a curiosity and ask a couple questions in that regard. But I think, I was kind of thinking in this question how that relates to my water element. And um, I think for a lot of, and I see the chat, a lot of you do have primary water. I think what's really neat is that, air brings the logic and water brings a lot of the emotion. And I think that a lot of times us waters will ask, well, how does that feel? Where airs will ask, like, does this make sense? But I think what's really cool is that when you're able to bring those together, you're actually able to really create emotionally intelligent communication because it's thoughtful and it's compassionate. I think that there's definitely an aspect for me where I will find tension will arise when I feel like an air is being too intellectual and I'll feel like they're almost disconnected when you're trying to say something that's, from the heart. And they don't mean any harm. It's just that's where their brain goes. It's, how can I solve the problem? How can I, approach with curiosity and figure out what the next solution is? That's where their intention comes from. But I do think the integration between the two is so powerful because you're honoring both head and heart between those two. And I think that when we're able to bring that empathy, like Terry said, back into play, bring a little bit of that water, even if it's not our dominant. I see Stuart's in there. He's high fire, low water. But even if it is our lower element, bringing that forward and just saying, what might this person have been going through today? Maybe they had a crappy morning. Maybe that's why they're acting the way that they are. And if we're able to bring that forward and have that intellect lead the way, oh my gosh, you have a really powerful combination there to, like Terry said, leave people better than you found them.
I'll be honest, and moment of vulnerability here. I had to learn that the hard way. And in so many cases, it was such an exercise in rationality for me that oftentimes the emotional side of things are like, how is this impacting somebody? When I'm like, okay, actually, here's the 17 reasons that you're wrong based on science and X, Y, and Z. For me, if I'm wrong and somebody says that to me, I'm like, huh, okay, I'm either going to debate you on it, but I'm not going to take it personally. And I didn't realize that I was a little different in that with the air and fire, that can actually be really impactful. So I've started, obviously, I don't want to say started. I've learned that over the course of time. Am I perfect on that? Probably not. I probably still get into debate mode, despite the fact that that was 20 some odd years ago. But it is a practice. So for anybody out there that is still working on that, there's hope. You can get there. And people like Francesca and Terry are great coaches and people that help you to get along that line. There's a comment in the chat or in the questions from Taylor. How often do you three retake your assessment, or have you? I'll answer last on this one, but I'm actually curious how many times the two of you have taken your assessment to see what it is or where you've landed, and let's see what you come up with there. And if you're in the audience and you want to learn anything about anything as it relates to air or any of the other elements, toss it into the question and answer, put it into the chat. We want to answer your questions and hear what you have to say. But go ahead and answer, Terry.
I'm gonna pause on that for a half a second because one other thing that I do often when I show up is I'm willing to be wrong. Right. And that is something that I don't feel like enough of us lean into. Like I've said it from stage 20 dozen times, right? Hey, by the way, everything I just said could be totally bullshit. It's entirely possible, right? And because I only know what I think I know, and there's a massive distinction there. But to the question, I have taken the assessment enough times to know exactly how to manipulate it to be able to come up with every result that I could possibly want. Um, and so, but it's interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. I almost feel like we should take the assessment twice. The first time under the guise and the belief of how we are. And the second time under the guise and following the prompt of who we want to be. Because I think the gap between those two things would be very instructive, especially on a coaching side and a training side. But because you asked Taylor, I commit to taking that assessment again in the next 24 hours. I can assure you my earth is still going to show up as hot garbage and my hair is probably still going to be pretty high. I want to raise my fire score, dang it.
Francesca?
Great insights, Terry. I would say for me, I have a bit of a different view with the assessment, and perhaps you'll change my mind on this. I think because we do so much work in that space, I think that there's the part of my brain that knows if I take it, I'm very familiar with the questions. I'm very familiar with how they're worded. I feel like it would be too contrived if I were to do it now because I would be able to manipulate that score however I wanted to. When I originally took it, I took it in 2020 and fire came up first. I hadn't paid for the full assessment at the time and I thought I made a mistake. I was like, oh gosh, I'm not a fire. That's a mistake. And I left it alone, but I ordered my very first fire planner when the whole Kickstarter program started, just to honor my primary element as it said. But when I retook it in 2023, I was delightfully surprised to see that my primary element was still fire. So I thought maybe it's not a mistake. And when I found out my secondary, third, and fourth element, I was like, this actually makes a lot of sense. And obviously, spending a bit more time with Jay and talking about how those elements relate, I was able to look back on my past with my figure skating, everything, understanding even though I was the one that won the most conscientious or sportsmanlike awards. That was my water, but still, even though I was that compassionate figure skater, I still had a drive to win. And I think coming to peace with that made sense. But so no, I don't know if I'm going to be taking the assessment anytime soon, but maybe Terry will change my mind on that. I feel like it's pretty accurate, but I know that we always grow and evolve. And I think that's one of the things for any of you that are new in this chat today. We're not talking about personality. You don't take this once and all of a sudden, boom, that's what it is. Your personality is pretty concrete by the age of 6 years old, doctors say. We're talking about neuroplasticity. You have a choice of how you behave. So like Terry said, if you're leaning into who you want to become, if I were to use an earth planner for the next 6 months, that's going to increase my drive to defend. That is going to increase that element. And so I think that's a beautiful part. We can shape and mold ourselves however we want to. And I also think, and I actually was just writing a piece on this the other day, and I titled it "The Gift I Never Asked For." And I think sometimes what a misnomer can be is that sometimes we look at our lowest element and go, "Oh gosh, earth or water, they're so low, it doesn't serve me." But sometimes those are the elements that just balance us out perfectly. And sometimes leaning into the things that we think don't serve us could be the gift that we never asked for. So I would just say, yes, be mindful of what you want to lean into, but also remember that we're holistic beings. There's something so special about each of those elements and why we can't really survive without all of them. So that's my perspective.
I love that. No, I think that's both great insight. And going back to something that Terry said is there's always some level of self-reporting bias. When you get into anything where you're assessing yourself, we tend to put in there I don't want to say what we want to be. Sometimes we can be very, very realistic, but there's going to be some other places where there is an element of self-reporting bias. One of the cool things, and I'll share this with you before I give you my response. One of the cool things is when we had first developed and designed this, we actually did an analysis with interviews and asked people, like, okay, how do you see yourself? And so on and so forth. Did it line up with their actual results and their surveys? But then we also took it a step farther and said, this is how this person's reported their assessment. This is what they say. Does this resonate? Does this land? Does this make sense? And it was very interesting because I would say that the correlation was very, very high. It was definitely statistically significant, but there was definitely some gaps. And one of the things that both Terry and Francesca have encouraged, and it is something that we're working on, is a 360 version of this. So not only would I be able to take the assessment and get a better understanding of my own self-reporting, but now Terry's going to be able to say, how is Jay on these different elements? How does he show up? What does his behaviors look like to me? And his perspective on Jay's elements, Francesca's perspective on Jay's elements, Stuart's perspective on Jay's elements. And the idea here is, and this is where we're still working, is how do you create the averages across all of those, then compare them to yourself to see what the actual gaps are between your own personal perceptions, potentially, and the perceptions of people that are surrounding you. So that is something that we are working on. It's a little bit more methodologically challenging than I would have expected it to be. Otherwise, it'd be done right now. And well, you all know how I love Earth and methodologies, and that just excites me. And but I digress. I've taken it probably 3 times. And to what Terry said, that the first one was the very first time that we had designed it. And it was interesting because I think in that first one, the fire element came in a little bit lower from me. And that was not the actual final version of the assessment. But at some other point in time, when we had gotten to the final, I actually took it. And it was when we had switched platforms because the original assessment was built with a spreadsheet. This is funny. I mean, the original assessment was built with a spreadsheet, a PowerPoint deck, and essentially SurveyMonkey, and it was all manual. So even like at that point in time, it was all handwritten and everything else like that. When we graduated to our new assessment platform, I retook it so that way I would have my results inside. Consistent, absolutely consistent. My fire element went higher. My air element was right around the same spot. My earth and my water probably went a little bit lower at that point in time. I've taken it one point time since, and it is pretty consistent. There's a couple of things that I look at and think about in taking it over again at this point in time is I've done so much research on the different aspects that I don't know that I can get away from my own biases of knowing exactly what each of those things are going to do, how they're calculated, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line. So my next step is going to be to have others take it, assessing me and mine, to be able to see what my gaps are in perception or anything else like that. Um,
It's
what
like
I
the
advise,
Johari window
and you,
version of this.
what was that?
It's like the Johari window version of the assessment.
Right. Yeah. So what we do advise is every 6 months is generally good distance in between taking it. We've tried to do assessments where we did once every 90 days with people going through different programs But the reality is if we're not working on ourselves, don't expect a whole lot to change, right? If we're doing something to work on ourselves, like Francesca had mentioned, she's working on an intervention or shifting this kind of perspective. One of our early studies was Nihal, who's actually one of our certified guides now. She wanted to improve her fire element. So she had taken the assessment. She was very high, I want to say very high water and earth, and really focus the next year of time using the fire planner, building up the fire activities, doing the different things that would be very commensurate with a fire element. And she was able to shift over the course of 365 days. Her fire certainly elevated to a higher level. She was much more comfortable with those things. And after a year of kind of focusing on the water, she shifted it back. Now, are these massive shifts? Did she go from a zero, a 2.5 to a one? Of course not. That's not how our brains are designed. It's a little bit about the neuroplasticity and just kind of being able to be more comfortable in the patterns of behaviors and growing some of those different circuits in the system. So I probably won't take the assessment again for a little while unless I'm actively pursuing an intervention to focus on one of those areas. And I'll probably lean into the 360 reporting as my next growth opportunity. But 6 months is about a good time frame. That's what we found. That's where we can actually see some growth if you're actively doing an intervention. Francesca, you had something that you wanted to say about the science.
Um, I I'll maybe have each of us share a little bit. I just thought for the ones that are new in our chat today that maybe haven't been on a lunch and learn to share a little bit about like what happens in the brain when it comes to these different drives within us. So yeah, Jay, if that fits, I'm happy to start that off and then pass the baton to you and to Terry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any of you that are new here, one of the things that we love chatting about is how this all relates to what's happening in our brain. So for a lot of us that have the air element dominant, or that when the air element comes to life in us, it's definitely like the dopamine release. So it's the motivation molecule, as we're all familiar with. So when a person encounters something new, complex, or intellectually stimulating, their dopamine drive lights up. So it's essentially what's happening with that air element. So this kind of gives that rewarding feeling of I want to learn more. And I think what's really neat about this and why I've enjoyed studying so much of this, just understanding how that relates to what's happening in our brain. So our prefrontal cortex gets activated. It's our thinking center. So it gets heavily activated during tasks that involve problem solving, just any type of reasoning or hypothesis testing, and just any type of core air element traits that come up in that particular sector. But and then also we have like a default mode network, we can call it. So it's like our mind wandering system. So air types often love to reflect and daydream and connect the dots. So they're that section of our brain gets highly activated, allowing us to kind of forecast what's next and generate new ideas. But yeah, so Jay will probably talk about this in our future sessions, but dopamine's a big one, and then norepinephrine that increases alertness and helps air types hyper focus on intellectual tasks. And acetylcholine is the other one that we talk about too. So it's crucial for memory formation, attention, key for absorbing and storing new information. Um, and then oxytocin. So it may be activated when we're sharing new ideas or teaching others, linking intellectual connections, and kind of gives us that emotional satisfaction. But I thought I would just share a bit of that because I know that you talk about it from time to time. Same with Terry. And I wanted some of our new people in the chat to kind of know a little bit of the insight of the things that Jay loves to learn about every day.
Beautiful.
Francesca may not be a nerd, but I think she just admitted to being nerd adjacent. Is that what just happened?
I'm very nerdy.
That's
All
so
of
good. That was so. When you said, "Oh, we're all going to talk about it," I'm like, "Oh, great! My acetylcholine doesn't work very well, or whatever that word was." It's amazing. Is that the one that was tied to memory? Is that the neurotransmitter?
Yeah.
Very spot on.
Nice. Got
Oh,
It's the
brain jokes.
neurotransmitter that activates the receptors in our hippocampus. So
Okay.
we
Excellent.
don't need to go that deep, but yes, thank you, Francesca, for that.
That's
So
amazing. So good.
let's talk about this though. And all right, some of our people in the chat, and Taylor, I do see your question. I'm gonna jump back to that in a moment. I'm gonna take us on a different pathway here. How if we're managing a team, if we're leading a team and we've got heirs on that team, how do we keep them motivated? How do we keep them engaged? What do we do to make sure our heir elements feel seen, heard, and valued? How do we keep them from getting bored? This is something I think that every leader should be looking at is how can we make the best of our elements? So I want to take it in that direction for some application here. What are your thoughts? How do you keep air elements engaged, thriving, and really kind of living their best elemental life?
Tell them the what, tell them the why, most importantly, tell them the when. Do not come anywhere close to telling them the how. They will strangle you or not do it, right? But if you give them a very clear, this is the end result, this is when it's due, how can I support you best in getting this done? And get the heck out of the way, right? And maybe it's not my error, but man, people over my shoulder drive me nuts. I don't enjoy that piece. You can either tell me how to do it, right? Excuse me. You can either tell me what to do and get out of the way, or if you get into the how you're going to do it, I'm going to sit down and make you do the whole thing so I can do it exactly like you want. And that's it. Those are the two options that you have.
Awesome. So no micromanaging. Perfect. Francesca, your thoughts?
May you share, Jay, what it was really related to?
Yeah, so if we're leading a team of heirs or if we've got some heirs on our team, how do you keep them engaged? What do you do to keep them motivated?
On a professional level. I mean, I love what Terry said, state the vision because we're visionaries, right? We want to know what the end goal is, what it needs to look like. Jay always says paint what done looks like because we know that any of us that have some high air in us, we can get very sidetracked on, we'll have 10 other things done. But I would definitely say in terms of if we have maybe a fire, maybe not so much a fire, but maybe a high water or high earth leading a team specifically. They're going to be very structured on stick to the plan while us heirs are saying, but what if we try something new? And of course, that's where tension arises. But I would say, like Terry said, state the vision and really I think one of the things that I really appreciate the way that, and I know that Terry leads this way as well. When I've had different people on my team, this is how I've intended and tried to lead and do my best to. Jay does the same. It's just really not being that bottleneck, stating the vision, being clear on what that needs to have happen, make sure the team all is working, right person with the right role. I think that that's really important too. So really making sure that those drives are in the right seats, and then just us as leaders getting out of the way, like Terry said, because I think that um, just let them do what they do best.
I love that. And I think those are some great ways to do it. For me, it's also a question of novelty. Don't have me doing the same project for 6 years. Give me some other space that I can explore something. And even if it's like, hey, I've got a job that is pretty consistent or whatever else, you know, ask me questions of, can you find a different way to do this? Is there a more effective way to do this? Like, I'm going to be curious to look at that. I love data, and data is definitely somewhere between earth and air. Data for data purposes and making sure that we can be consistent is probably more of an earth element. But data and, what can we learn from this? Like most people might be excited if I can activate your air element and say, hey, air shows up as a primary element, 22% of our 40,000 assessments. And it's like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. So like data can be really fascinating to me. But if it's me crunching the same data day in, day out, one of the clients that I'm working with right now, they're doing a market trends analysis and they had an air on it who is really interested in doing this for the first 6 months. And now they're just like, I'm done. Like, I'm looking at these numbers every single day. And ironically enough, they ended up putting an earth into that spot. And the next 6 years, that person's just like, I still find this fascinating every day. We're making decisions based off of this data. The air set the entire framework up, literally did all the research to figure out what it was, and then got bored once it was already there. So that novelty aspect, I think, is something that's really important of how can you create some novelty. We're getting near the end of our time. I do want to spend a little time of, okay, well, how can we boost up our air as part of our question? So I'm going to put Terry and Francesca thinking about that. Like, this is my example of novelty and how I boost my novelty. I often try to not take the same way home twice when I'm driving. Like, it's just it I like going in different directions. I take side streets. I love exploring. That's one of the big pieces of my air element. Traveling, trying new things, going different directions. But if you want to activate your air element, most of us have a pattern of that we drive the same way to the same store every single time. Go sample a new restaurant, go try a new store, order something different off the menu. Because I know a lot of people are like, well, this is my go-to. I love meatloaf and I get the meatloaf every time I come here. Try something different. These are all going to be active practices that you can use to actually stimulate the parts of your brain associated with the drive to learn. So I'm going to turn it over to Francesca and Terry. What are your thoughts? What are some ways that you could really activate your air element? What are some different things that people can do to create that condition of curiosity, learning, and novelty?
Go ahead, Francesca.
Are you going first, Terry? It's up to
Go
you.
ahead, please.
Okay, sounds good. I wanted to add one thing to Jay's last point too, before I share my last final thought. Was about between like the structured and the unstructured side and the elements. And I think a big thing, and I wanted to add on, was mutual respect. I think that if heirs can slow down enough to explain why their idea is valuable, and if someone like an Earth can listen long enough to see that their innovation actually can have structure, I think that, I don't know, that just came to my mind. I think that's a really huge component there that'll make those two work so well together. But in terms of everyday, how to increase our air, habit stacking is great. While you're brushing your teeth, I don't know, maybe you can try having like a timer on your phone that maybe you're listening to a 5 minute little clip it of something interesting that you find fascinating. Or, for me, when I'm working out, I have a podcast playing in my ears. Or if I'm on a walk, sometimes I'm listening to new music. There's always something that you can have the innovation side and you can just pair it with another habit. And like Jay said, just trying something new. I'm going to start learning violin here. So just learning a new skill or even just something as simple. We are so fortunate in this day and age to have innovation and the ability to learn at zero cost. Go onto YouTube, type in a couple sentences of what you're wanting to learn, and you have free knowledge as like a little mini university there. So I think if we're able to curate even your social media, unfollow the accounts that aren't teaching you anything and follow people or accounts that are going to inspire you. So when you log in onto Instagram, you're not wasting time. You can spend 30 minutes. That's what I do. And I'm just inspired. I have all the motivational speakers talking to me and what you feel like they're talking to you. So that would be my suggestion. Use every opportunity to learn something new and get inspired at the start of your day. Terry.
Love that. For me, it starts with take the approach that you don't know everything, right? And I'll tell you, 2020 changed things for me. Like, I've always thought I was a reasonably intelligent fellow that knew some stuff. In 2020, I recognized I didn't know butt kiss, right? Everything I thought I knew crumbled, and it was pretty fascinating to observe, to soak up, and say, huh, what is real? And then realize that it depends on who you are to determine what is real. And so, just that idea of becoming exceedingly interested in other people's perspective helps you lean into that curiosity, that stop assuming you know and start assuming that you can learn from others' experiences, from the way they show up. Um, it changes everything, and it changes how you behave. It changes how you interact. All of a sudden, you start putting other people first, or at least before you. It's such a much better way to engage with the world around you, right? Because, like Jay said, that novelty piece, right? Even if their stories all sound identical. We've all got something unique to offer. And so accepting that as truth and then trying to find those nuggets that are going to serve you. You can lean into your fire and make a game out of it. Hey, this person gave me more nuggets than that person, whatever the case may be. And now I want chicken nuggets. I don't know why. It's just how it goes.
Yeah. And thank you for that, both of you. So, Sharon, we did, that was kind of the question to answer your question in the chat about the process for changing. It's about activating that particular drive. And I see you in the chat had said you're liking that approach. Even simple things that we just realized that we do in repetition and patterns. Like, for example, Francesca had mentioned brushing your teeth and doing a habit stacking, which is a great piece of advice. The other thing is brush your teeth with the opposite hand. You will actually be triggering novelty inside of your brain. Your brain's not used to it. You're learning a new skill. You'd probably stab yourself in the gums a few times, but after that, you're going to be building new neural pathways. So the air element is really about being open to change and that novelty and that exploration. So trying something that's not that's outside of your normal scope, your normal pattern, doing it safely. So it's something that is a joyful experience, trying something new or whatever else. What's the worst that can happen? That's something that an air asks themselves pretty often. What's the worst that's going to happen? I fail, I don't make it, or anything else. If you can adopt that for smaller things, you'll actually be building on those different aspects and strengthening the amplification of the different neurotransmitters that are associated with the drive to learn. So hopefully that gives you some ideas to check things out. And yeah, awesome. Well, team, we are at the end of our hour. And we've covered everything from leadership to innovation to being more air to motivating air. So let me hear your final thoughts on the air element. And let's frame it around this. How do we make sure that we can keep our air elements in check if we are the squirrel? And you have a short amount of time to answer this so we can stick the landing. Francesca, will you lead us off with this?
How we embody the squirrel.
How can we keep ourselves from being squirrel when we're an air element?
Avoid the squirrel.
Avoid the squirrel, yes. Just being present, and I always go back to when Mr. Rogers was alive, the gift that he gave everyone when he passed. People would always say about him that they made them feel like they were the only person in the world when he was talking to them. And I think that the more present we can be, the more as intentional as we can be in each present moment, that's how we're going to be able to eliminate that squirrel aspect. Just being present, be curious. And then in our spare time, we can squirrel, but just be present with the people and the moments that you have. I think it's magic.
Terry?
Deadlines, right? Set a timeline for the thing. And it's crazy. I gave a 2 hour presentation this morning. I've known about it for 6 weeks. I finished the deck last night at 6 or 7 p.m. And that was like a high five moment for me because normally I'd finish the deck at 8:57 a.m. today. But having that mental, like, this needs to be done with some time, super important.
You stole mine, but that's all right. I've got one more. Lean into somebody that is not an error. Balance yourself out. If you're not doing it internally, this is Julie is on this call. She works with me directly. She helps me stay on track. She helps me stay organized. She helps me in a number of ways. So find somebody in your network. If you're a high air, guess what? You probably have a large network because collaboration is one of the things that you're going to be attracted to. So find that person that you can be your balance and your check, and that might also help you out. So there's a third one. All right. Well, thank you so much to all the participants for engaging, asking questions. Taylor, I think we're going to do a special episode on some of the science and the questions related to the science at a different point in time because we've got a lot of content that we could cover on that space. But in the meantime, I wish you all safety, health, and wellness. And thank you again for being here and joining us in our Lunch and Learn. And of course, thank you to Terry and Francesca for joining in on this, sharing their insights and their wisdom with all of us, and myself included. I definitely learned something today and activated my air. So thank you, team, for being here. And again, we'll see you all next month when we return with our next Lunch and Learn related to behavioral elements. Behave intelligently.
Thank you, everyone.